A second chance at love, a love story forged through sacrifice and duty. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the description. Episode 2. Roxan was clueless about the incident at the kindergarten. After leaving the kindergarten, she headed straight to the research institute set up in the country by her professor. The moment she stepped into the building, she saw a charming man dressed in a suit approaching her. "Welcome back, Roxan. I'm excited to be your colleague again." Colby Galloway stood before her and extended his hand. Roxan nodded and shook his hand, quickly retracting it. Previously, Colby was abroad. He was also in Harvey's team and was involved in many types of research and development. During that time, Colby had been her assistant. After all, he was a graduate of a famous school, and his capabilities were acknowledged by Roxan and Harvey. Though Roxan's attitude was impassive, Colby did not mind it. He smiled and offered, "Come on. I'll bring you to the office." With that, he turned around and led the way, introducing the structure of the research institute and the key personnel along the way. Upon reaching the office, Colby grinned at Roxan, saying, "I've specially instructed someone to decorate this place. It's based on your preferences in the past. Linda's workplace is right outside." Roxan studied the area and responded with a satisfied nod. "That's really thoughtful of you. Thank you so much." Colby was momentarily stunned. He then put on a gentle smile. Even his voice sounded warm. "It's nothing much. You don't have to be so polite with me." As he was saying that, he could not conceal his liking for her that poured out from his gaze. Despite knowing she was a mother of two, it did not decrease his adoration for her. After all, Roxan was an excellent woman in every aspect. In fact, she was so excellent that her qualities could cover up her shortcomings. However, Roxan did not notice the gaze he was giving her. After briefly scanning the office, she said to Colby, "My purpose for coming this round," she wrote, "I want to be friends with both of you." Shortly after, she lifted her notebook, covering the lower half of her face and only revealing her bright eyes. "Here today is to understand the operations of the research institute. Could you bring me around the facility?" Colby was still smiling brightly. "Okay." Roxan nodded slightly and gestured for him to lead the way. When Colby returned to his position in front of her, his smile turned bitter. It was true that he liked Roxan. Sadly, she only viewed him as an ordinary subordinate. This is so frustrating. Soon, both of them left the office area and went straight to the main region of the research institute. They arrived at the testing area. Several researchers wearing laboratory coats and masks could be seen busy working at their respective workbenches. Roxan did not want to disturb them. Hence, she asked Colby to briefly introduce all the projects and their progress. By the afternoon, Roxan already had a clear idea of the research institute's situation. At the same time, she discovered an important problem. When they were visiting the testing area earlier, there was a foundation work area where no work was being carried out. Roxan asked the researchers about it, only to find that the drugs they needed were finished, and they were still waiting for the research institute to distribute them. Many other areas were facing the same situation. Due to the delay in the distribution of drugs, the research of several projects had no choice but to be put on hold temporarily, leading to an increase in cost and time needed for the projects. Gradually, it led to a major loss to the research institute. After stepping out of the testing area, Roxan frowned and gave Colby a stern look. The delay of drug distribution has caused many types of research to be put on hold. What's going on here? Didn't you find a way to solve this? Hearing her words, Colby stopped smiling and answered seriously, I'm already looking for a solution for this problem. Roxan frowned as she looked at him, waiting for his next sentence. Recently, I've met with a medicinal ingredients supplier and have talked to them about a long-term collaboration. All that's left is to sign the contract. The agreed time to sign the contract would be tomorrow afternoon. The reason things did not go smoothly previously is that the research institute was still in the construction phase. Many complicated and miscellaneous affairs had to be dealt with, and the employees were still getting used to the system. It was only recently that they had begun to adjust themselves. Moreover, Horrington's medicinal ingredients are mostly monopolized by a few major suppliers, and the supply was not enough to cover their demand. On top of that, our research institute is fairly new to the industry, causing many suppliers to intentionally increase their prices. It cost us a lot of time to negotiate for a lower price. That was why things were delayed until now. Colby gave her a brief summary of what had happened. Though it sounded simple, he was just a researcher. Hence, he suffered a lot when he negotiated with the cunning suppliers. Even if he did not reveal much detail, Roxan could imagine how difficult things were. As the person in charge of the research institute, he naturally had to manage everything. It was normal to face challenges everywhere. In fact, she encountered some herself when she was abroad. After she listened to Colby's explanation, Roxanne's expression relaxed. Things must have been very difficult for you. The corners of Colby's lips lifted. Not really. It's my job, anyway. What's the name of this medicinal ingredients supplier? Roxan brought the conversation back to the topic of business again. If it's possible, I'd like to go with you to the signing of the contract. Since I'm going to take over the future matters of the research institute, I think I should go over and have a few conversations with them. Colby simply responded, Sure. You could come along tomorrow. Roxan nodded. After that, both of them returned to Roxanne's office. When she saw the person behind her had no intentions of leaving, she was perplexed. Is there anything else? Colby smiled politely. Actually, I have something to ask you. Are you free tonight? It's your first day at work, and I've arranged a dinner to welcome you. At the same time, you can get to know the people in the institute. Hearing that, Roxan relaxed her brows. Thank you. Tonight's dinner is on me, then. We're going to be working closely together in the future. I should show my sincerity as the person in charge. Seeing that she had agreed to come, Colby did not haggle over such details. He nodded with a smile. Okay. See you after work, then. With that, he turned around, intending to leave. Right then, Roxan called out, Could you please bring over all the documents I need to deal with later? I've got no urgent matters, anyway. I can use the time to take a look at them. Sure. I'll get them now, he answered. Soon, Colby brought all the documents to her office. After placing them down, he excused himself politely and helped her to shut the door. At last, Roxanne was the only person left in the office. She pulled out her phone and dialed Madeline's number. "Maddie, are you free tonight? Could you help me pick Archie and Benny up? I've got something to attend to tonight, and I might be home late." Madeline did not question further and gave her a brief reply. "Okay." After making the arrangements for the children, Roxanne started looking through the documents. It was not until Colby knocked on her door that she stopped working. It was time to get off work. Lucian furrowed his brows, and a look of annoyance flashed through his eyes. "Am I seeing things again? I wouldn't bother about it if it's just once or twice, but this has been going on for 2 days straight. I've been seeing her figure in different places, but the silhouette only flashes past my eyes without leaving any traces behind." He could not help but snort coldly before retracting his gaze. "I must be going mad. That's why I'm thinking of her again." Meanwhile, Caden had been waiting by the side for some time. Seeing Lucian not moving his feet, he asked carefully, "Mr. Farwell, our client has been waiting for a long time. Aren't we going in?" Lucian shut his eyes for a while and recollected himself before replying calmly, "Let's go." With that, he strode into the building with his long legs. Caden followed closely behind him. When Roxanne and Colby arrived in the private room, all the employees of the research institute were already there. Colby let her sit in the main seat, while he took the one beside her. After getting themselves settled, he introduced her to the crowd. "I'm sure many of you have met Dr. Jarvis today, but I'd still like to introduce her to all of you." Everyone turned to look at Roxanne, who nodded as a form of greeting. "This is Roxanne Jarvis. You may address her as Dr. Jarvis. Perhaps you might not be familiar with this name, but I'm sure everyone is familiar with the name she used abroad. She's Professor Lambert's greatest student, Janet." Everyone in the room was stunned to hear the name. It took them a while to come back to their senses, and their eyes were instantly filled with respect. Janet was a name everyone in the medical industry was aware of. In fact, it would be safe to say that her name was well known abroad. After all, she possessed great medical skills from a young age. Rumor added that she inherited 80% of Harvey's skills. She was basically a role model for the younger generation. All that while, the employees thought Janet was a serious-looking, bespectacled academician with short hair. To their surprise, she was a beautiful woman. After returning to their senses, some of her admirers quickly stood up. "Are you really Janet? I really admire you. I've read every thesis you wrote when you were abroad. You're really my idol. It's our honor to be colleagues with you, Janet." The crowd started giving compliments, all of them looking extremely sincere. After exchanging glances with everyone, Roxanne smiled. "Thank you for the compliments, everyone. Here's to a fruitful collaboration." With that, she raised her glass. The others, too, raised theirs and downed their drinks in one go. Roxanne acted extremely friendly without any arrogance, causing all the employees to admire her even more. It was a pleasant and cheerful meal. Many of them toasted Roxanne, and she accepted them all. She had a high alcohol tolerance, but there were too many people who approached her for a toast. Before she knew it, she was already feeling tipsy. Seeing the dinner was about to end, Roxan excused herself to the toilet to wash her face and freshen up. As she walked out of the restroom and was on the way back to the private room, her phone vibrated. Roxan glanced at her phone to find a message from her children, asking her when was she going home. Seeing the text put a heartwarming smile on her face. When she was about to stop in her tracks to reply to their text, someone bumped into her shoulder harshly, and her phone almost flew out of her hands. Roxan gripped her phone tightly and apologized to the other person. "I'm sorry." Before she could even finish, the man questioned angrily, "Are you blind? What a mood killer for such a night." As he spoke, a stench of alcohol entered her nostrils. Roxan knitted her brows and backed away discreetly, putting some distance between them. When the drunkard saw her face clearly, he stopped scolding her and gaped at her beautiful face. Roxan put up her guard when she realized the man was a drunkard. Hoping to avoid unnecessary trouble, she apologized again, "I'm really sorry. Are you okay?" When she finished speaking, the man in front of her suddenly smiled maliciously. Even his voice sounded excited. "Hello, pretty babe. I'm fine. You'll find out after having a few drinks with me. I'll forgive you for today's matters once you make me happy." Roxan frowned. She knew the person in front of her had lost all sense of rationality due to his drunkenness. Hence, she ignored him and lowered her head, wanting to walk past him. Just as she arrived beside the drunkard, his voice rang out again. "Don't leave, pretty babe. I'm really rich. If you agree to be with me, I promise you'll live comfortably for the rest of your life." He then let out a perverted laugh, scanning Roxan from head to toe. This beauty has such a pretty and delicate face. And her body has all the right curves. She's so fair that even her skin glows under the light. I bet she must be satisfying to touch. The more he looked at her, the more excited he got. He reached out, wanting to touch her face. Seeing his hand nearing her, Roxan put on a cold expression, took one step backward, and kicked him in the stomach. Since it was her first day at the research institute, she was dressed formally. Thanks to her heels, the kick was even more powerful. The person was so drunk that he was already swaying on his feet and was rather woozy. Before he could even react, he had already been given a hard kick in his stomach. His face paled, and he clutched his stomach, staggering backward and landing heavily on the ground. "How dare you disrespect me? You should be feeling honored that I'm attracted to you. How dare you kick me?" he yelled. After squirming on the ground for a long time, he gritted his teeth and lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot. Roxan cast him a disgusted glance before making her way past him. Suddenly, he roared into a corner, "Someone, get here! That woman attacked me! Get her into the private room now! I'd like to see how she can continue putting up that attitude with me tonight." Right after he finished speaking, two burly bodyguards dashed out from the corner. When they saw the drunkard in such a pathetic state, they hesitated for a moment. "Boss, don't bother about me. Just get her," the drunkard roared. The bodyguards immediately walked toward Roxan. When she heard the sound of footsteps approaching her from behind, her heart skipped a beat, and she reached into her bag to grab a bag of powder. If they get near me, I'll let them have a taste of this medicine. As she turned around with the bag in her hand, the bodyguard that was about to touch her suddenly screamed and flew past her. In the next second, the other bodyguard disappeared from her sight in the same manner. Roxan was dumbfounded. It was only then that she realized there was another silhouette behind her. She turned around and spotted a slender figure standing a few steps away from her. Her heart sank, and she felt as if her mind was about to explode. She spun around instantly, wanting to flee from the scene. Lucian, who wore a grim expression, was dressed in a tailored suit. His sleeves were rolled up to his forearms, and a few buttons around his collar were unbuttoned. He stood in the corridor while looking at the woman in front of him with a burning gaze. In fact, he was in the middle of a social event. He found the air rather stuffy and decided to come out to get some fresh air. Never did he expect to meet Roxan out there. It's really her. The longer he stared at her, the darker his gaze became. He wanted to say something before seeing the woman attempting to flee. Frowning, he dashed forward and grabbed her wrist. Meanwhile, Roxan was so nervous that she could hear her heart pounding. She had no idea when he managed to catch up to her, and his grip caught her off guard. She froze on the spot, and all kinds of thoughts raced through her mind. Roxan! The man's furious voice rang out beside her ears. Stop hiding from me! Roxan finally came to her senses and struggled subconsciously. Sensing her movements, Lucian exerted more force into his grip. Let me go! Roxan gave up struggling and turned around stubbornly, meeting his gaze. Let go! Lucian's words sounded as if they were forced out of his gritted teeth. He stared at her intently with his dark eyes. It had been 6 years since they last met. Roxan's face had traces of maturity, yet she looked as beautiful as ever. However, she was no longer the obedient and gentle person he remembered. Unlike in the past, when she was submissive to him, she was currently more imposing and fiercer. There was even a distant look in her eyes. Anger brewed in Lucian's heart when he realized all that. He stared coldly into Roxan's eyes and enunciated each syllable clearly as he spoke. Do you think I'll let you escape again? Roxan's heart trembled. She wanted to say something, but Lucian would not give her the chance to do so. His voice had a dangerous tone and he instructed Kaden, who stood behind him, get rid of all these scums. Without giving Roxan time to react, he grabbed her by the arm and marched into the private room beside them. Roxan had a sense of uneasiness, but she could not break free, no matter what she did. Just like that, she was dragged into the room, stumbling along the way. The private room was empty. Once Lucian entered the room, he shut the door right away. At that moment, the room fell into pin-drop silence. Only the sound of their breathing could be heard. Roxan scanned the area. For some reason, she felt a sense of danger, and she started struggling fiercely. What are you trying to do? Let me go! In the next second, Lucian pinned her against the wall effortlessly. Both their bodies were pressed so tightly together that Lucian's warm breath landed on her ears. Roxan suddenly stopped struggling and leaned against the wall, straightening her body stiffly. Without realizing it, she even slowed down her breathing. They were so close that her chest would touch the person before her if she breathed slightly harder. The room fell into dead silence. Roxan gritted her teeth as her mind raced. No matter how much time had passed, the oppressive feeling he gave her was still as strong as before. However, their relationship had changed long ago. Roxan clenched her fists and forced herself to calm down. We're already divorced. Lucian and I have absolutely nothing to do with each other now. We're people of different worlds. At that thought, Roxan took a deep breath and said calmly, Lucian, let me go. We can talk this out if you've got something to say. Lucian was slightly stunned to hear her calm tone. After some time, he took a step back, but he did not release her. Roxan secretly sighed with relief, and her expression became calmer. Do you have nothing to say to me? Lucian narrowed his eyes upon seeing the change in her expression. Perhaps it was because Roxan had thought things through that her heart did not tremble at his words. With a distant tone, she said, Mr. Farwell, we've been divorced for 6 years already. I think there's nothing I have to say to you. When she ended her sentence, Lucian pinched her chin hard. He was forced to meet his gaze. What did you just call me? Lucian's eyes burned with rage as if they could shoot fire at any time. Roxan endured the pain and avoided his gaze, not uttering a single word. Lucian was even more infuriated at her act of silence. Mr. Farwell? That form of address sounds really distant. Well, it makes sense though. It's been 6 years, after all. Hasn't this woman always been heartless? She's so heartless that she could even leave her daughter behind and act like a stranger. I bet no one's more heartless than her. Roxan, why are you acting like a stranger in front of me? Lucian gripped her chin harder. Roxan winced, frowning as she met his eyes with a look of resistance. Lucian smirked. Weren't you the one who shouted how much you liked and loved me back then? And now, you're acting like we're strangers? Have you forgotten what you did to me in the past? You might have forgotten, but I haven't. Roxan froze for a few seconds. She never expected him to bring up the matter of 6 years ago. It was impossible for her to forget what happened that night. That night, she had approached him like a sacrificial animal, all for a tiny moment of intimacy with him. As she thought of her emotions from that night, Roxanne's heart turned cold, and she balled her fists that were hanging by her side. Unwilling to back down, she responded, I remember it. What's wrong? Do you feel like you'd been taken advantage of? Do you want to get back your dignity? Tell me. How should I compensate you, Mr. Farwell? Lucian trembled with rage, causing the atmosphere in the private room to be filled with terrifying tension. The pain in her chin was getting more intense. Still, Roxan endured it and continued calmly, to be honest, you weren't conscious that night, and I didn't feel anything. Now that I think about it, it was just so-so. But it's true that I drugged you. So, I won't object if you want to be compensated. Very well. Now that so many years have passed, this woman knows how to use her words to anger me. Lucian's eyes narrowed dangerously. Indeed, he was unconscious that night, and he barely remembered any details. However, any man would be angered when they heard Roxanne's words. After several seconds of silence, Lucian lifted her chin slightly and said coldly, "So? Since I've caused such a misunderstanding, I don't mind being at your service again." Panic flashed through Roxanne's eyes as she watched the man lean toward her. She wanted to escape, but she had nowhere to run. Passionate kiss, the man's hot lips pressed against hers, and the two breathed on each other's skin. At that very second, Roxanne's mind went blank. She never thought that Lucian would take it all the way there. The man was even tightening his grip on her chin, seemingly trying to force her to open her mouth. Right then, Roxanne came back to her senses and began thrashing. "Let go of me, Lucian Farwell! Have you lost your mind? We're in a restaurant. Anyone might come in any time." Lucian moved a little further from her because of her struggles. When his mind registered her words, he frowned. "So what? Weren't you the one who said you were going to compensate me? I'm just taking what you owe me once, but you're already afraid." Roxanne's eyes twitched. A wave of disgust washed over her when she thought about what she went through the other night. Perhaps it was because he had been drugged that night. Lucian was barely aware of what he was doing. Still, he had been taking action instinctively, and he had been rough. Hence, she remembered nothing but the pain from that incident. Now that the man's scent and the faint smell of alcohol were wafting across her nose again, and after hearing what he said, Roxanne began shaking. When Lucian saw no response from her, his eyes darkened, and he leaned over to kiss her again. It was a kiss rougher than the previous. Roxanne could not move at all under his grasp, and the panic in her heart was growing more and more intense. It had been 6 years, but her body still could not resist that man. If he notices my reaction to him, I would still be the same person I was 6 years ago. With that thought in mind, Roxanne sobered up instantly. When she sensed the man trying to enter her, she quickly bit down hard on his lip. The metallic tang of blood soon flooded their mouth. The man froze. In the next second, he moved with even more vigor. Roxanne could barely take in any breaths from his continuous kisses, and she was slowly losing strength in her body. The only reason she didn't slump down was that the man was still pressing down on her hand. A beat later, Lucian stopped and with his lips still on hers asked, "I thought you said you feel nothing toward me. Why have you gone so weak? Roxanne, your body is far more honest than your mouth is." The man's voice was hoarse. Roxanne panted. Just as she was about to refute him, she suddenly felt a large hand wandering toward her chest. Once she sensed his action, Roxanne somehow mustered up the force to shove him away and slap him. "Lucian, weren't you the one who said you were going to marry Aubrey? I've let you go, so what are you doing now? Are you taking revenge on me? If you are, then you've done it. I was foolish to have targeted you with such an extreme trick, but just as you wanted, stopped clinging to you. I won't appear in your life anymore. So, this is the end of us." With that said, Roxanne shot him a glare and rushed out of the room, never once looking back. Meanwhile, after Caden cleaned up the mess, he went to the private room they were at to guard the door for Lucian. All of a sudden, he saw Lucian's ex-wife rushing out of the room. He froze for a few seconds before coming back to his senses and running into the room to check on Lucian. Right as he entered the room, he was greeted by a dim scene. His employer was standing in a nearby corner with his head tilted to the side. His cheek was a little red, and there was blood on his lips. At the same time, it seemed like he was fuming. "Mr. Farwell, are you okay?" Caden's heart skipped a beat as he tentatively walked over to ask a word of concern. Lucian's expression was dark. He reached up to touch his cheek before brushing his thumb across the corner of his lip. It came back wet. That woman bit down rather hard. She's as ruthless as usual. As he looked at the blood on the tip of his thumb, Lucian gritted out, "I'm fine." At that, he turned to leave the room. "Go on. Keep running, Roxan. You're already back at Horrington. I'd like to see where else you can run to." When he stepped out of the private room, he spotted the drunkard and his subordinate still crying out in misery on the ground. After a cold glance at the people on the floor, Lucian turned around to order Caden, "Break whichever hands they used to touch her." Sensing the tense atmosphere, Caden hung his head and replied without hesitation, "Yes, sir." Lucian said nothing else before he left. Her relationship with that man Roxan had nowhere to go after fleeing the room, so she hid in the stairwell. As she leaned against the wall and panted, she reached up to touch her aching lips. It felt as if the man's warmth was still lingering on them. A moment later, Roxan lowered her eyes self-deprecatingly. It had been many years, and she thought she had no feelings for Lucian anymore. Yet, after just one meeting with him, the man was wreaking havoc in her mind again. After a while of recomposing herself later, Roxan returned to the room. The workers inside were still partying away, and they only became a little quieter when she entered. Noticing that her mood seemed to have changed since she left the room, Colby furrowed his brows. "Why did you leave for so long? Did something happen? It's like something's off with you." Roxan gave him a nonchalant smile and shook her head. "It's nothing. I gave my son a call." With that, she took a seat, not letting Colby ask her anything else. Roxan had left for quite a while. Not long after she returned, most were almost done with their partying. Roxan was not in the right mood, so she decided to end the party. They all went downstairs together, and everyone bid goodbye to Roxan and Colby. Soon, only the two of them were left. Colby softly suggested, "I'll send you back if you don't mind. You've drunk quite a lot tonight, and I'm worried about you." Roxan inclined her head, not disagreeing with his offer. "Thank you." She had yet to buy a car after returning to the country. "It seems like I have to hurry up and get a car soon." "It's my pleasure." Colby opened the car door for her. After thanking him again, Roxan went into the car. In the meantime, by the entrance of the restaurant, Caden was fearfully looking at his employer's back. How can things be so coincidental? I can't believe we're watching Roxan entering another man's car." As Caden watched the car slowly drive off, he cautiously raised his head to observe his employer's expression. Lucian had a grimace on his face as he fixed his gaze on that car. A beat later, he looked away and gritted out, "Check who that man is and what kind of relationship he has with her." Caden hastily said yes to him. By the time Lucian returned to the Farwell residence, it was already 9. After sweeping his gaze across the living room, he realized Estella was nowhere to be found. A slight frown crept onto his face at that. Where's Essie? Catalina, who took care of Estella, was on her way down the stairs. Mr. Farwell, Ms. Estella is done with her shower and is now in her room. Would you like to go upstairs to see her? Lucian gave her a slight nod and began walking toward the stairs. Mr. Farwell, there's something else I'd like to tell you about, Catalina hesitantly continued. When Ms. Estella came home tonight, she had a bruise on her wrist. I asked her about it, but she refused to tell me anything. I'm not sure if she has been bullied at kindergarten. I think this is something important you should look into. Lucian narrowed his eyes. I understand. I'll go upstairs and take a look at her. With that said, he quickened his footsteps to Estella's room before knocking on the door. Soon, Estella opened it for him. She did not have much reaction after realizing that Lucian had come home. After opening the door, she turned and walked back to where she came from. Lucian followed her. Then, he saw the girl going back to her table and returning to her drawing. He did not disturb her, for he noticed how focused she was. A while of waiting by the side later when he saw her put down her pencil he uttered, Catalina said that you're hurt. Let me take a look at you. Estella obediently reached out her injured hand to him. When he saw the wound on her hand, he knitted his brows. What happened? Were you bullied by the other kids? Estella stiffened for a second before shaking her head vigorously. She wasn't bullied? Lucian was confused. Then what happened? Estella then picked up her pencil and slowly wrote a few letters on her book trapped. She then cocked her head to the side, a little dubious of what she had just written. It was too difficult for her to spell it out. Whenever she could not spell out a word, she would usually try to spell it according to how it sounded, or she would just skip the word. However, she did not often write out that word, so she was unsure if she actually spelled it right or not. Did you trip? Lucian asked after looking at the word she wrote. Estella nodded. Lucian then let out a sigh of relief and gently touched the spot she hurt. Herself it. Did the teacher treat your wound? Estella nodded again. Lucian nodded before his eyes drifted toward her fair little hands again. This will take days to heal, and you need to treat the wound. I'll help you, okay? Estella did not reject him. Immediately, Lucian crouched down and lifted her into his arms before going down the stairs. Once they reached the living room, he placed her on his lap and sat on the couch. At the same time, he said to Catalina, "Bring the medical kit over." Catalina nodded in response. It did not take her long before she brought the kit over. Lucian then took out a spray from inside and sprayed it at her bruise. Then, he massaged the area for a while. It was quite a bad bruise. Even though it had been hours since the initial impact, it still hurt. Nevertheless, Estella did not kick up a fuss. She just pursed her lips as her brows furrowed. Lucian turned to study her expression every once in a while to see if he was hurting her. He lost himself in his thoughts when he saw her frowning face. She looks a little like that woman when she's solemn. Sensing her father's gaze, Estella looked up at him, baffled. Instantly, she spotted his injured lips and she pointed at them with a look of confusion. It was easy to understand what she meant. She was asking him how he had gotten hurt. Lucian held her hand and replied, "It's fine. A wild kitty bit me." "A wild kitty?" Estella became even more confounded. She grabbed the pencil and paper on the coffee table and wrote, "Where did the cat come from?" Lucian's eyes darkened a little. "From overseas." That was all he was willing to say. He was afraid that he would not be able to suppress his fury around his daughter. When he noticed the perplexed look on her face, he reached out to take away the pencil and paper in her hands. "Let's not talk about this anymore. It's almost time. I'll bring you to bed now." Estella was still curious about the matter, but she decided not to prod further at her father's words. Obediently, she let her father carry her upstairs. The two children were still awake when Roxan went home. Madeline was keeping them company as they watched the television. The moment she entered, the two children looked away from the screen and ran over to her. "Mommy!" Roxan smiled and patted their heads. "Did you drink?" Archie smelled the alcohol on her and scrunched up his nose. "I'll make a hangover remedy for you now. That way, your head won't hurt when you wake the next morning." With that said, he turned and went into the kitchen. Benny brought her all the way to the couch and made her sit before he climbed onto his mother's lap. As he solemnly massaged her temples, he asked, "I'll massage your head for you so that you won't feel that bad." Madeline could not help but feel jealous at how sensible the children were despite their young age. "Why are my godsons so sweet?" Roxan smiled and looked at her. "Do you like them? Have one yourself." Hearing that, Madeline quickly shook her head. "Forget it then. The one I give birth to might not be as sensible as Archie and Benny. I just want to steal the ones from you." As Benny continued to massage his mother's temples, he consoled his godmother, "Aunt Madeline, there's no need to steal us. If you're drunk, Archie and I will surely take care of you in this way too." Hearing that, Madeline wanted to carry the boy up and kiss him. However, the two boys were busy, and she could only squeeze out, "You boys are the best. I love you two to death." Roxan shuddered from the cheesiness. She then took the hangover remedy that Archie gave her and slowly sipped on it. By the time she was done with the concoction, it was already late at night. "All right, I'm fine now. Hurry upstairs to rest." Roxan kissed the foreheads of her two sons. The two boys nodded and bid Madeline good night before they went up the stairs. Once the two boys were upstairs, the smile on Roxan's face slowly faded. Madeline turned off the television and inched over to ask in concern, "What's the matter? Something on your mind?" After a moment of hesitation, Roxan told Madeline a light-hearted version of what happened earlier. "I met Lucian when I was having dinner just now." There was no one but Madeline who Roxan could talk to about what happened 6 years ago. Upon hearing that, Madeline froze. Then, she whispered, "What kind of fate is tying you both together? Horrington is such a big city, and I thought the chances of the two of you meeting would be close to zero if you're not actively seeking each other out." Roxan lowered her eyes, seemingly deep in her thoughts. "So, what are you thinking about after meeting him?" Madeline continued querying. The corners of Roxan's lip turned down. "What can possibly be on my mind? My relationship with him has ended 6 years ago. We're nothing but strangers now. I won't be affected by him anymore." All I want to do for the rest of my days is to take care of Archie and Benny and have a good life with them." It seemed like she had thought things through. Madeline sighed in relief before patting her good friend's shoulders. "That's good. You're an excellent woman, and there are plenty of people courting you. Take your time to make your pick. Let's leave that douchebag in the past." Roxan gave her a slight nod, not wanting to continue with the topic. She then said, "By the way, I haven't had the chance to buy a car after coming back here. I had to get rides from my co-workers for the welcome party today, and it seems rather inconvenient. Are you free next morning to pick a car with me?" Adeline's attention was shifted to the next topic, but she was confused as to why Roxan wanted to buy a car. "Why do you want to buy a car?" "I have a few in the garage. Just pick one." Roxan chuckled as she arched a brow. "Are you really that generous?" After sharing a look, Madeline wrapped her arm around Roxan's neck and uttered, "Of course. After all, you're my godson's mother. What's mine is yours." "Thank you," then, Roxan said to her. The two chatted away for a while longer. When they glanced at the time again, it was already quite late. It was then Madeline reluctantly went back to the house next door. After Roxan washed up, she lay on the bed. However, she could not sleep. It took her a long while of tossing and turning before she entered the dreamlands. In her dream, she returned to the empty room at the waterfront. In the room, Lucian was pinning her against the wall. He was narrowing his eyes and coming closer and closer to her. Just as their lips were about to touch, Roxan jolted awake, completely drenched in sweat. After waking from that dream, she could no longer sleep. Thus, the next morning, Roxan had obvious dark eye circles as she sat by her children's side at the dining table while they were having breakfast. "Mommy, did you not sleep well last night?" Archie asked in concern as he stared at his mother's dark circles. Roxan tensed up a little as she thought about that dream. A few seconds later, she flashed them a leisure smile. "Yes. I lost track of time reading documents last night." Her children were observant individuals, and Roxan was afraid that they would prod her for more information. Hence, she quickly lowered her head and pretended to focus on eating breakfast. At that, the two boys exchanged a look but asked nothing else. All they said was, "Don't tire yourself out too much, Mommy. You have to take good care of yourself." Roxan's lips curved as she bobbed her head in agreement. After breakfast, she brought the boys to Madeline's place again. "Choose anything you like. Don't worry about anything." Madeline brought them to her garage as she held onto the whole bunch of car keys in her hands. The boys were young, but they could recognize quite an amount of luxury cars. Therefore, once they laid eyes on the cars in the garage, they applauded and cried out, "Aunt Madeline, you're amazing." After walking around the garage, Roxan chose a mid-ranged priced Mercedes that was worth over $1 million. Madeline gave her the keys without any trace of hesitance. Once Roxan got the car, she drove the two to their kindergarten. "Bye, Mommy. Don't overwork yourself," the two said to her after they went down from the car. Roxan ruffled their hair. "You too. Be good at school. I'll come and pick you up at night." The two boys nodded obediently and walked into the kindergarten together. Roxan only left after watching the two disappear from her line of sight. She then started the car and slowly drove away from the kindergarten's gate. Minutes later, a Rolls-Royce rolled up in front of the kindergarten's entrance. Caden came down from the car before opening the door to the back seat. Then, he carefully carried Estella down. Once Estella's feet were on the ground, she turned to wave at her father. "Go in now," Lucian softly said to her as he patted her head. Estella nodded in response before turning to leave. Lucian only took his gaze off Estella after the teacher picked her up. He then said to Caden, "Let's go." Caden bobbed his head and drove toward Farwell Group's office. Once Lucian arrived at his destination, he hurriedly went to join the executive meeting. By the time the meeting was over, more than an hour had passed. Lucian went straight back to his office. "Lucian, you're back." Just as he stepped into the room, he was greeted by Aubrey's voice. Hearing her made him knit his brows. Then, he saw that Aubrey, who was in a black suit, was standing in front of his office desk with a smile. It seemed like she had been waiting for a while. "When did you come?" Lucian strode to the other side of his desk before letting his eyes drift past the documents on the table. Finally, he landed his gaze on Aubrey's face. Aubrey sat down when she saw him sit, the smile on her face never once wavered. "Not long ago. I heard from Caden that you were in a meeting just then." She spotted the scab by the corner of Lucian's lips, and her heart lurched. "Did you hurt your lips?" A flash of displeasure danced across Lucian's eyes at the reminder of the incident the night before, and his tone turned colder. "I accidentally bit it. There's no need for you to freak out over it." Aubrey nodded with slight hesitance. She consoled herself by telling herself that there were no other women around Lucian but her for all those years. Therefore, her suspicion was just paranoia. With that thought in mind, she finally felt a little more at ease. "So why are you here?" Lucian asked in a flat tone. Suspicion crept into Lucian's eyes as he watched Estella leave the car. Estella seemed much happier than usual. Maybe she's letting down her guard after interacting with the kids in the kindergarten. It seems like the psychiatrist was right. Her autistic symptoms will improve if I let her interact more with her peers. Hearing that, Aubrey recomposed herself and smiled again. "I have some work matters. The project our families were working on is only missing the last step of signing the contract. So I've come to ask if there are any other terms. Also, my parents were asking if they can invite you for a meal tonight. Your parents will be there too, so I was wondering if you are free for that." "They invited my parents too. Without a doubt, they must want to urge us to hurry up with our wedding." Lucian glanced at her before muttering icily. "Please tell your parents that I need to meet someone tonight, so I won't be free." The smile on Aubrey's face froze. For a moment, she did not know how to respond to him. Indeed, their aim for the dinner was to urge them to quicken their marriage. It was something that should have been done a few years ago. She finally managed to hold out until Roxan was gone, but Lucian kept delaying the matter with work matters. After that, he used Estella as an excuse to delay the wedding further. By then, 6 years had already passed. Aubrey had been waiting for so long, but the conclusion had yet to come. How could she possibly not feel anxious? Even now, Lucian was still postponing the matter. The corners of Aubrey's lips tilted downward as she looked bitterly at the man in front of her. Lucian, I've been waiting for 6 years. How many 6 years can a woman have? I don't mind waiting for you, of course, but if it's fated that the two of us will be together, why do you still not want to do the wedding? At the very least, the elders in our families will feel reassured. As she spoke, Aubrey carefully watched Lucian's expression. When she noticed that he seemed unfazed, she steeled herself and added, "We've been planning for the wedding since the start, so why? I did make a promise to wed you," Lucian coldly interrupted her. "But you, of all people, should know why I ended up promising you that." Fear pulsed through Aubrey when she registered his expression. "I think the Farwell family has made more than enough compensation to the Pearson family throughout all these years. As a matter of fact, the compensation made has far exceeded the worth of this engagement. Even if we did not proceed with this engagement, no one will say anything about it." Lucian's voice was neutral the entire time. Evidently, it was a speech he had long prepared. After Lucian said those words, he looked away from Aubrey's face. He had decided to marry Aubrey back then to repay the favor her grandfather had done for them. That was why he interacted with the Pearson family so closely. That was also why he had agreed to marry Aubrey when the elders of the families suggested it. In fact, for a while, Lucian was sure that Aubrey was his first crush. That lasted until 6 years ago when that woman left without saying anything. It was then he realized that the feeling he had for Aubrey was not love as he initially assumed. After that, the elders of both families kept urging him to marry her, but he had found all kinds of excuses to delay the wedding. In those 6 years, he had also done everything he could to assist the Pearson family and agreed to all kinds of business requests they made to repay them for the kindness back then. Now, it seemed like he had done more than enough to repay them for that favor back then. At the very least, it was enough for him not to proceed with the wedding. "Lucian," Aubrey's voice trembled as she looked at his expressionless face. She wanted to find out if her guesses were right. Lucian lifted his hand to massage the bridge of his nose. Then, he cut her off, "Put down the file. I'll look at it later. I still have work to do, so if there isn't anything else, you can leave." Aubrey bit her lip and stared at him for a moment. When she realized that he was not going to change his mind, her eyes slowly reddened. Still, she forced the upset and sorrow down her throat, put down the file, and left. When Aubrey heard that, she widened her eyes in disbelief as fresh terror reared up within her. Clearly, Lucian wanted to break off the engagement. Aubrey's mood was grim as she exited the Farwell Group's office. She had been waiting for 6 years, but Lucian never once gave her a proper answer. Now, he was telling her that he was planning to call off the wedding. Fortunately, Aubrey was certain that there were no other women around Lucian. In other words, she still had a chance with him. With that thought in mind, Aubrey's grave expression lightened up a little. "Yes, I still have a chance. The wedding is only unsalvageable if I make Lucian frustrated with me. I have to stay calm." As Aubrey consoled herself, she entered the car. "Are you heading back to the company?" Her assistant, Charles Lambton, was tentative as he spoke to his employer. for he noticed the look on her face. Aubrey glanced at him. No, I'll be having lunch outside. Haven't we agreed to meet via our research institute to sign the contract in the afternoon? We're going back only after signing the contract. Charles nodded. T2 in the afternoon, Roxan and Colby departed from the research institute to the destination where they had agreed to meet the crude drug supplier. On their way there, Roxan abruptly recalled that she had yet to find out the details about their business partner. Thus, she asked Colby, "Can you tell me the details about the crude drug supplier that we're about to sign with?" She was the person in charge of the research institute. If she knew nothing about the crude drug supplier, the other party might think that she was not serious enough about the deal when they met later. In that case, her ignorance might affect their collaboration. Knowing what was on Roxanne's mind, Colby explained in detail. This crude drug supplier is massive in Horrington. Their family established itself by running crude drug businesses. Moreover, the prices that this crude drug supplier has are reasonable. Furthermore, after they found out that our research institute has a certain level of influence in the market abroad, they became interested to work with us. They seem sincere, so don't worry about that. Hearing that, Roxanne inclined her head in understanding. Simultaneously, she breathed out an inaudible sigh of relief. I know the few major crude drug suppliers in Horrington. According to your explanation, the one we're signing with should be one of them. I wonder which one is the one we're about to meet with. Colby replied, the Pearson family. Roxanne stiffened immediately. The Pearson family? As far as she knew, there was only one Pearson family in Horrington who was in the crude drug industry. Coincidentally, that was the family she had some issues with. At that though, Roxanne creased her forehead and prayed that she would not be unfortunate enough to encounter the one she did not want to meet the most. Soon, they arrived at their destination, a cafe. The people from the crude drug supplier had yet to arrive. Colby and Roxanne took a seat first. They then ordered 2 cups of coffee and waited for the other party to arrive. Dozens of minutes later, someone knocked on the door of the private room. Lobby straightened up and said to Roxanne, "They're here." Roxanne gave him a quick nod. Rising to her feet, she then said, "Please come in." Soon, someone pushed the door open, and a male voice traveled into their ears. "Sorry that we're late." The moment Roxanne lifted her head, she locked eyes with Aubrey. Instantly, Roxanne sighed in her mind. Speak of the devil! Unlike her, Aubrey widened her eyes in shock. As she was overwhelmed by surprise, she screeched out, "You Roxanne? Why is it you? Didn't you disappear a long time ago? Why are you here now?" Colby and Charles were baffled by Aubrey's response. Colby then asked in a curious but friendly tone, "Ms. Pearson, do you know Dr. Jarvis?" Aubrey's eyes flitted toward Colby. "Dr. Jarvis? Roxanne Jarvis is the person in charge of our research institute. When she found out that we're signing a contract with you, she has asked to come along as a sign of our sincerity," Colby introduced. However, Aubrey's expression only turned even darker. All she wanted to know was when Roxanne had returned. "It's Lucian's first time telling me that he's thinking of calling off the wedding this morning. Is this because of Roxanne? Has he found out that Roxanne's back? Have they met each other?" The more Aubrey dwelled on it, the more anxious she became. As she stared at Roxan, her expression darkened and paled. On the other hand, Roxan was much calmer. It was as if it was her first time seeing Aubrey. She glanced at her and frowned before straightforwardly asking, "Ms. Pearson, are you not planning to continue with our collaboration?" Hearing her, Aubrey swiftly tucked away her emotions and looked at her for a moment. As her expression turned icy, the look in her eyes changed into an amused one as well. "Of course I'm planning to continue. Dr. Galloway has been working on this contract for such a long time. I won't let his efforts go to waste." With that, she summoned the waiter and ordered another 4 cups of coffee. While they were waiting for the coffee, Aubrey's darkened gaze lingered on Roxan. Despite her unwillingness to admit it, Roxan had changed a lot after 6 years. In the past, she had a cautious demeanor, but now, all she needed to do was sit there, and anyone could feel how intimidating she was. Her looks and presence were overpowering Aubrey. On the other hand, 6 years had gone by, and Aubrey had never changed. The man she nearly had was now getting further and further away from her. When she realized that, Aubrey's hands under the table tightened into fists as jealousy coursed through her veins. "I truly wish to work with your institute, but I don't think the price we negotiated previously is a suitable one. Since Dr. Jarvis is here, I think we can discuss the price again." Even though Aubrey had a professional smile on her face, the look in her eyes was a glacial one. Upon hearing her, Colby parted his lips, about to speak, but Roxan stopped him. She calmly asked, "Ms. Pearson, what you mean? I hope we can have an increment of 2% of the original price," Aubrey uttered. "An increment of 2%? Colby stiffened. "Ms. Pearson, haven't we come to an agreement the other time? We're now about to sign the contract, so why are you increasing the price all of a sudden?" At his shocked response, Aubrey folded her legs and replied, "Indeed, we've agreed on it, but everything in the crude drug market has risen in price this year. If we were to sign the contract with the price we previously agreed on, we'll be suffering a loss too great. Dr. Galloway, please forgive us." She made it seem so rational. Colby's expression tensed. Just as he frowned and was about to say something else, Roxan stopped him again. "Ms. Pearson, you must want to suddenly raise the price because you saw me. I know the prices in the crude drug market well. We can have a negotiation if you want to increase prices, but raising it by 2% right here and now is far too unreasonable." Roxan wanted to be professional, but clearly, Aubrey did not. Hence, there was no need for her to endure her antics. Aubrey knitted her brows in displeasure. She then coldly asked, "Regardless of what the reason is, that is our current price. If you don't think that's suitable, we won't mind letting this business deal go." Roxan agreed to it. "In that case, let's take this as time wasted. A company that doesn't stick to its words isn't a company we'll be at ease working with." With that said, Roxan stood up and said to Colby, "Let's go." Colby nodded, and the two exited the cafe. "Is there something between you and Aubrey?" Colby could not help but ask when they left the place. He could sense Aubrey's clear hostility toward Roxan during their meeting earlier. Not wanting to dwell on what happened back then, Roxan simply said, "In a way." Noticing that she did not want to talk much about the topic, Colby did not prod her for more. Instead, he began talking about the crude drug supplier matter. If we're not going to work with Pearson Group, we'll have to find another crude drug supplier. Roxan bobbed her head. Then that's what we're going to do. Horrington is a big place. I'm sure there are other crude drug suppliers who will work with us. Okay, Colby answered with a nod. He would rather deal with the trouble of looking for a new crude drug supplier than to see Roxan targeted by someone. Meanwhile, in the cafe, once Roxan was gone, a cold look crept onto Aubrey's face. She ordered Charles, "Tell all of the crude drug suppliers in Horrington that, if they dare to work with VR Research Institute, they'll be enemies of Pearson Group." Charles did not know what happened between his employer and the Dr. Carlier, but he could sense that his employer was in an exceptionally foul mood after meeting Roxan. A shudder racked his body upon hearing Aubrey's tone. Without daring to delay any further, he replied, "Of course. I'll work on it right away." With that said, he stood up and left. Soon, Aubrey was the only one left in the cafe. When she thought about the attitude Lucian had earlier in the morning and the frightening demeanor Roxan had a while ago, Aubrey panicked. Regardless of whether or not Lucian had rejected her because of Roxan, it was a fact that Roxan and Lucian were married in the past. Aubrey could not be certain what Lucian thought about Roxan. If things continued to be delayed, she dared not imagine what else would happen. "I can't wait any longer." Meanwhile, at Farwell Group. "Mr. Farwell, I've found out information about the man Ms. Jarvis was with last night." Caden entered the room and stood in front of Lucian. Lucian immediately put away his work and asked worriedly, "Who is he?" Images of Roxan leaving with a stranger last night started flashing before his eyes. "The man's name is Colby, and he's the person in charge of the VR Research Institute." Previously, Mr. Farwell went to him for medical treatment. Caden instinctively picked up the sudden change of ambience in the room, and he became extremely wary with his words. "Besides, I also found out that Colby is still single. But by the look of things, Ms. Jarvis is not in any way related to him. The other possibility is that they knew each other when they were studying medicine in the same university." Being made aware of the possibility, Lucian's facial expression softened. "Besides this, did you manage to find out about anything else?" Caden appeared to be in a dilemma. "This is the extent of my investigation. Regarding Ms. Jarvis, we only know that she returned to the country recently. As to what she did and where she was overseas, we have not been able to find anything at the moment." Lucian furrowed his brows, displeased by the answer. However, knowing that it would be futile to pry further, he decided to change the topic of the conversation. "How is old Mr. Queen now?" Caden was about to apologize for his incompetence but heaved a sigh of relief when Lucian started asking about old Mr. Queen. "It doesn't look good for him. They've consulted all the famous doctors from inside and outside of the country, but they were helpless." Lucian nodded slightly. "Reschedule my agenda planned for tomorrow night. I want to pay a visit to old Mr. Queen." "Understood," replied Caden. Caden, upon being certain that there were no further instructions, left after waiting for a while. When they just arrived at the Research Institute, Roxan and Colby sprang into action and hurriedly contacted all the medical ingredient suppliers in Horrington. Due to the lack of supplies, many projects in the research institute had to be held in abeyance. If this were to continue, the losses would spiral out of control. Hence, time was of the essence for them to collaborate with a medical ingredient supplier. Before this, Colby tried contacting the suppliers in Horrington, but his proposal was rejected instantly. However, since they ran out of options, they were forced to test their luck once again. VR Research Institute? I thought we had this conversation before? Your asking price is too low. We are not interested to collaborate with you. Just as Roxan mentioned the name of the research institute, the rejection from the other end of the phone call was instantaneous. Roxan gritted her teeth. We can increase the price from our original offer. What about an increase of half a decimal point? Let's try to work out a feasible plan, and there's always room for negotiations. The person interrupted and said, it's still too low. We need to increase at least 3 decimal points or else there's no room for negotiation. Hearing such bold demand, Roxan hung up promptly. Meanwhile, Colby's expression didn't look pleasant either. I'm so sorry, Dr. Galloway. All of our supplies have been booked by someone else. We do not have any extra at the moment. The answer was obviously an excuse, which indicated the other person's unwillingness to collaborate. Colby simply responded, all right, I understand. He then hung up the phone after that. After an entire day of cold calling, there was no positive news even until the next afternoon. Though the suppliers responded differently, some courteous and the others impatient, the conclusion that resulted from the phone calls was that none of the suppliers were willing to collaborate. Even worse, one of the suppliers made it expressly clear to Roxan that they would never collaborate with the VR Research Institute. But the reason for that was not disclosed. It was clear as daylight that they were sabotaged by someone in the dark. As such, the culprit could be none other than Aubrey. Roxan couldn't help but feel irritated. Ultimately, she was being sabotaged and the projects in the research institute could not proceed because of this. She never expected that Aubrey's vengeance toward her persisted even after 6 years. Even worse, Aubrey resorted to such atrocious tactics to get back at her. However, it was not the time for her to be bothered by emotions. Roxan clenched her fists in an attempt to calm herself down. She then looked toward Colby and said, it's okay. If Horrington is not the solution to our problem, then we can try other cities. Surely, someone must be willing to collaborate with us. Be that as it may, it also meant that the costs and time needed to achieve it would be higher. While Roxan did not mention it, she was very much aware of the consequences. She too hoped to find a suitable partner in Horrington. However, the prospect of doing so seemed quite bleak. No, there's no need to head to other cities, Colby uttered. He appeared to have thought of something, and his tone relaxed. Roxan arched a brow. Are you saying that there's someone in Horrington that is willing to collaborate with us? The small suppliers are definitely out of the picture, and we need someone with larger operations. Colby nodded. I know. However, this might require you to personally attend to it. Roxan was perplexed. Colby then said, I heard it from you actually. But first things first, have you heard of the Queen family? Colby continued, the Queen family supplies medicine and built an empire out of it. The Queen family is a prominent family in Horrington, and old Mr. Queen has a good reputation in the community. However, his health has been deteriorating lately. Because of this, the Queen family has been looking for doctors to cure him, but to no avail. They invited me to try out, but I couldn't do much. However, you might stand a chance in this. Is that so? Roxan replied. She understood what he meant but was nevertheless hesitant. The Queen family are in the big leagues. When it comes to the pricing, it will not necessarily be lower than what we are being offered right now. Colby replied. Before this, the Aoyen family offered expensive medicines as a reward for whoever can cure old Mr. Queen of his condition. In the future, they can also come up with an arrangement to supply medicine at half the price. Roxanne's eves glistened with hope and she felt the boulder being lifted off her shoulders. Why didn't you say this earlier? That's a great thing. Colby beamed. I thought about it, but admittedly I'm not good enough. Besides, you were not bare back then. Hence, I gave up and never thought about it until now. Perhaps you can give it a try. What do you think? Of course. Not a problem at all. Roxanne confidently stood up to urge him. Please help me contact the Queen family and help me make an appointment with them. Looking at Roxanne's passion for matters that concerned the research institute, Colby's heart surged with a sense of relief. He smiled and said, I'll do that now. Wait for me here. Then, he exited the office and pulled out his phone. Meanwhile, Roxanne sat quietly in the office and waited. Irrespective of how complex the treatment would be, Roxanne was determined to cure old Mr. Queen. Soon after, Colby returned. How did it go? Roxanne eagerly asked. Colby nodded. We still have a chance. The Queen family has yet to find a. Alfred's condition was quite complicated. It was why the famous doctors weren't sure what to do. Just describing his illness alone took Colby a long while to finish. At 6 in the evening, after Roxanne got off work, she went to the Queen residence alone according to the address given to her by Colby. The person who opened the door was a middle-aged man dressed in a butler's outfit. He looked at Roxanne and politely asked, Greetings. May I ask who are you? Roxanne smiled. Hello, I'm the doctor who's here to treat old Mr. Queen. I called during the afternoon. The butler scrutinized her suspiciously because she looked pretty young. Someone as young as her that capable. Still, he didn't show his doubts on his face. After 2 seconds, he invited, Since you're a doctor, please follow me inside. He turned and guided Roxanne in. She didn't mind that he doubted her. One of her principles was that before she treated a patient, she would accept any form of distrust. She followed the butler into the courtyard. The structure and decor of the courtyard looked elegant. It clearly showed the Queen family was a family that cared a lot about appearances. After they entered the mansion, the butler gestured for her to take a seat on the couch. A visitor came by earlier, and Mr. Queen is accompanying them to meet old Mr. Queen. I'll let them know you've arrived. Please wait here. Roxanne nodded. All right, doctor that can cure old Mr. Queen's condition. Knowing that I have someone to recommend, they agreed to let you visit without any hesitation. When are we heading there? Roxanne continued asking. Tonight, replied Colby. Roxan agreed immediately. The timing was perfect, as she too wanted to go there as soon as possible. I need your help. Please let me know all the symptoms that old Mr. Queen has. I will need to make the necessary preparations. Roxan became serious the moment she spoke about medicine. Colby obliged. She then sat on the couch. Soon after, a housekeeper served coffee to her. A few minutes passed, and she heard footsteps descending the stairs. She put her cup down and turned to the staircase. A young couple strolled down the stairs. At first glance, both of them looked quite familiar. The man was handsome, and the woman was beautiful. It was likely they were a pair of siblings. As they walked, they were speaking to someone behind them. It must be the visitor the butler mentioned earlier. Roxanne's line of sight followed them until she could see the visitor. It was a tall, handsome man. And his embrace was a child. He was currently talking to the siblings in front of him with a relaxed expression. The man slowly turned his sight toward her, as though he noticed she was staring. Her heart thumped uncontrollably when their eyes met. Lucian. I didn't expect to see him here. Memories of what happened that night rushed into her mind. Roxanne's eyes trembled as she almost couldn't bear to look straight at him. She only calmed down after clenching her fists forcefully. Upon taking in a deep breath, she pretended as though nothing happened and stared at the siblings. On the stairs, Lucian paused and narrowed his eyes at the woman sitting on the couch. His gaze was fixed on her face as though he was trying to confirm something. When she looked away, his gaze darkened. It really is Roxan. I thought she was someone else. Why is she here? He was a little puzzled, but he didn't show it on his face. What's wrong, Lucian? The man in front of him turned back to ask when he stopped moving. Lucian looked away upon hearing that and answered emotionlessly, "It's nothing. Let's go." The man in front nodded puzzledly as the trio continued to descend the stairs. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.